Griff's Library presents Project Alpha, one of 3 audio stories connected to Slater and the Goliath. Chapter 1. Dahlia glanced at her wrist. It was shaking again, and it was getting worse. She was sure of it. Not good. Not good at all. Ignoring the discomfort, she turned the joystick in her hand, feeling her space jet instantly sway and swerve. The ship twirled, and her helmet was pressed into her headset slightly. Pain or no pain, shaking or no shaking, she could still handle her ship as well as anyone she knew. She was one of the best, tied for first in her class, a high honor at the USSA Academy. It should have made her feel some sort of pride, some sort of joy, but she did not. The problem? She was tied for first, a shared position. Dahlia was a competitor, sure. That was a given for a fighter pilot. Being tied was only part of the issue, though. The real problem was the other person who shared the first place title, her brother, Ikaika. Yep, she was tied with her brother. To make matters worse, he was her little brother. "You all right over there?" Ikaika asked in her helmet comm. "You seem to be flying a little slower than usual today." Dahlia rolled her eyes. Smug little. "No, I am fine. If I am going slower, it's only so that I don't leave you behind." Ikaika grinned. It was the job of every younger brother to annoy his older sister. It was human nature, some kind of biological principle, science or something. And who was he to contradict science? "Nah, I think you are getting old, sis." He knew he was getting under her skin. They were each a part of an experimental flight program called Project Alpha. The USSA had commissioned new cutting-edge ships, faster, lighter, more maneuverable than anything before. They were still tinkering with the craft's capabilities and design, but one thing had been clear from the onset. The ships were too fast for pilots. Until now, the typical space pilot was in his 20s or 30s, and it was becoming clear that the ship's abilities were too great for the pilot's reflexes. Nobody could fly the things, not to their full potential. The Alpha Project was on a mission to account for that. The solution? Younger pilots. They seemed to have an easier time flying the new ships, but there was a window. They were learning an age range that worked best. That range started around 10 years old, peaked a few years later, and typically trailed off at around 16. Dahlia had celebrated her 16th birthday almost 2 months ago. She was about to age out. Years later, after more research, they would have put someone like her to work on a ground crew for sure. But science is sometimes slow to learn. Though she tried to ignore it, pretending that she could go on forever, she knew it. Deep down, she felt it. The shaky wrist. Her time was coming to a close. "How's this for slow?" Dahlia mumbled, zipping past her brother, nearly slapping her wing along his windshield. The backdrop of space, planets, suns, and moons provided a beautiful scene as the two trained together. "What was that for?" Ikaika complained. He knew what it was for. The two continued with their practice and formation exercises for a short while longer, before heading back to the main base. The next morning, the two found themselves in class, listening to an explanation from their instructor. Every seat was filled, 20 in total. A dark-haired woman with deep black skin and an accent stood at the head of the room, cycling through images on a screen. The images were of a new iteration of the ships that the students, or future students, might soon be piloting. The ship looked like a giant letter V. The pilot would reside inside the cockpit, which sat near the point of the V. The 2 propulsion packs powered each of the ends at the ship's rear. The USSA design teams were coming out with new iterations all the time. Would this new design really last any longer than the previous one? Dahlia glanced at her wrist. It looked fine. No visible marks to indicate an injury. The meds hadn't noticed anything at her last check-in either. Was it in her head? Part of aging out? "How about you, Dahlia?" the instructor called out. Moons. Dahlia hadn't been paying attention. In the seat directly behind her, Ikaika grinned. The instructor had asked a question, and his sister had been daydreaming again. Dahlia bit her lip, looking up quickly. Her long, braided hair bounced. It was a traditional braid she had learned from her mother, something her people had used since they had migrated from the island many, many years in the past. Ikaika leaned forward and whispered, "Distance from base to Saffron." Dahlia nodded, and in less than 2 seconds had the answer ready. 400,312, she said confidently. The instructor furrowed her brow. 400,312? She questioned. And Dahlia ran the numbers in her head again, doubting herself. But no, that had to be the answer, didn't it? "Yes, ma'am." The instructor shook her head slowly, then said, "I asked how much your body would weigh in space." The class burst into laughter. All except Dahlia. She would have her revenge on Ikaika. Chapter 2. It was going to be beautiful. Dahlia had planned it out perfectly. Ikaika would return from his time in the simulator room, go to his bunk, and lay down. This seemingly mundane action would trigger a chain reaction with hilarious consequences. Hidden under his pillow was a drawstring, a tripwire, so to speak. Once the weight of his head pressed against the pillow, it would tug and snap and attach knot, releasing a series of strings that ran to the bunk above him. Those strings were connected to a long water bladder, which would be pulled open when activated. Her brother, seeking a bit of rest, would instead be greeted by a showering waterfall right onto his face. It would be splendid. Dahlia waited, then waited some more. Where was Ikaika? What was taking him so long? After what felt like an hour, she'd had enough. Dahlia left the bunk, grabbed her ID card, and paced through the academy hallways to the sim room. As she walked, she couldn't help but wonder what might be keeping Ikaika. Extra practice? Did he stop by the gym? Had he somehow become aware of the trick she was playing on him? Was he in trouble? The sim room was set up with multiple machines, virtual training at its very best. The Sims were as close to the real thing as possible. Piloting space jets took endless hours of training. The room was mostly empty when Dahlia arrived. Using her ID card, she tapped it against the door and walked in. She glanced around and finally spotted her brother. He was seated at a sim at the far end of the darkened room. Strange, though. Someone was standing next to the machine. A man. Someone that Dahlia did not recognize. He had a squared beard that was trimmed around his mouth. Dahlia hated the beard immediately. Perplexed, the young woman paced toward them. As she did, it seemed the conversation was ending. The man thanked Ikaika and stepped away from the machine. He looked toward Dahlia and paused. He then gave a quick nod and began his walk toward the exit. They made eye contact for a brief moment. He wasn't old, maybe in his early 20s. Short hair, just long enough to style. Dahlia had never seen him before. She was sure of it. "There you are," she said, standing next to the sim. Ikaika didn't look up, keeping his attention on the game. "Hey, sis." "You been here the whole time?" she asked. "Just honing my skills," he replied. "Who was that guy? The man you were speaking with?" "That was a new instructor, Mr. Cuddle," Ikaika answered, focus still locked on the sim game. He flicked the joystick and the machine rumbled, his screen rotating as he flew the virtual ship. Mr. Cuddle? Dahlia wondered aloud. She remembered hearing that a new instructor would be arriving at the base. Ikaika nodded. "Yeah, he was asking for some help on a few things. Poor guy is lost, let me tell you. Had all kinds of questions. You'd think they'd give a guy, an instructor, some kind of orientation or something. Dahlia bobbed her head. Weird. Why didn't he ask one of the other instructors? Ikaika shrugged. Dunno. Maybe he figured that asking the top pilot would be a better option. Dahlia rolled her eyes. Ikaika grinned as he flew his game. An idea popped into her head. She lifted her finger to her mouth, gave it a little lick, and then quickly inserted the finger into Ikaika's ear. The 14-year-old boy squealed and jerked to one side. Gross! He exclaimed. Now it was Dahlia's turn to smile. That wasn't something she would have ever done in front of the whole class, or even a group of students. She had a certain proper, mature image that she wanted to keep intact. Ikaika rubbed his ear, but to his credit, continued and completed the virtual mission, finishing with a high score. He even performed a difficult stunt involving the use of his grappling tow hook to slingshot himself around a large asteroid. A nice move. Tow hooks were mostly useless. This time, oddly, he didn't gloat about the accomplishment. He stood, and they walked toward the exit of the sim room. Dahlia hoped he was ready for a bit of rest and would head for his bunk where the surprise shower awaited. Was it mean? Probably. Was it deserved? Absolutely. It was the duty of every good big sister to torture her younger brother. It was a rule passed down from their ancestors. Creature or beast, it was the law. And who was she to contradict the law? As they walked, Dahlia noticed that Ikaika's badge was not slung around his neck as usual. Lose your card? She asked casually. Huh? He then looked down and was surprised to find that the ID and lanyard were missing. When did you last use it? She asked. Well, I just had it. I know I did. In fact, I used it to get into the sim room. Dahlia exhaled, annoyed that her bunk prank was being delayed. Fine, let's go find it. After 20 minutes of searching the entire sim room, they'd had no luck. No misplaced ID cards. Ikaika stood next to the sim machine he had used. It would have been right here. I didn't use any other machines. It would have to be right here. It's not like I was doing somersaults around the room or anything. It would have to be right here. Dahlia thought. A question, a curiosity coming to her mind. Did you talk to anyone besides Mr. Cuttle? Ikaika responded quickly. Nope, just him. The two looked at each other, a similar thought rising to each of their minds. Would he take my ID card? Ikaika asked, unsure. I wouldn't put anything past a guy with a beard like that, she chuckled. Then added, maybe you dropped it by the door and he found it? He didn't recognize your picture because it's dark in here? It was a long shot, and an odd one if true, they both knew. But still, it was their only lead. Let's go find his office, Dahlia said. Her annoyance was taking a back seat to the intrigue of the missing card and its possible relation to the new instructor. Why would he take a student's ID? After a bit of wandering, the brother and sister arrived at the door. In fresh stenciling, the title on the plaque read, Mr. Cuttle. Ikaika lifted his hand to knock and gave a few taps. No answer. He knocked again. Louder this time. Nothing. Maybe he didn't come straight back to his office, Dahlia suggested. I suppose, Ikaika said. But just to be sure. He then twisted the knob. Dahlia didn't stop him. They both knew it would open. Office doors in the academy were not equipped with locks. Safety or something. The door swung lightly, and the two glanced inside. Empty walls, a few basic chairs for visitors, a window, a rectangular desk with a few odds and ends, a larger chair behind the desk. No Mr. Cuttle. I guess he didn't come straight back, Ikaika said. He then reached to close the door, but then paused. Did you hear that? He asked. Dahlia shrugged. Hear what? Ikaika listened again, then pressed into the room. A moaning, muffled, light. "Dahlia, come here," he called, standing next to the desk. She rushed to his side and gasped. There was a man on the floor, tied up and mouth taped shut. Chapter 3. "He's alive," Ikaika said. "He's breathing, but he seems to be out cold. He isn't waking up." Even when Ikaika pulled the tape from his mouth, the guy stayed asleep. Who was this man? And if he were the real Mr. Cuddle, who was the man in the sim room? "We have to call somebody," Dahlia said, moving for a phone on the other side of the desk. As she reached for the device, she noticed a photo frame, tipped over on its front. She paused, lifting the frame. She saw the photo. A man and a woman standing together next to a waterfall. They were both smiling, happy. Married, perhaps. The man was medium height. He had brown hair and did not have a beard. The photo was of the man on the floor, the real Mr. Cuddle. "I knew it," she said, sliding the photo toward her brother. "This is him. This is Cuddle." She picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number. "So who was I talking to?" Ikaika muttered, a slight tremble in his voice. The realization was just setting in. He had been fooled, tricked, and by a man who was capable of doing this to an instructor of the USSA. But why? Dahlia finished her short conversation explaining only that there was an unconscious man and that they needed help immediately. Explanation on why there was an unconscious man would be a little more tricky. Better to try and cover that in person. She hung up the phone, then, with a serious face, turned to her brother. "What kind of questions did he ask you?" Ikaika shifted his eyes, worried. Well, he was asking about our formations. He seemed very curious about future strategies and stuff." Ikaika glanced at one of the drawers of the desk. He shifted, pulling it open. He found a cabinet with marked topics. This was a general drawer that each instructor had in their desk, full of diagrams, teaching plans, and subjects. He arrived at the folder that would contain formations. It was empty, missing. "He took them. Everything on formations," Ikaika said, shuffling through the drawer. Dahlia bit her lip. Why would he take those? "There are some other things missing here too," Ikaika continued, "like diagrams for our fuel chambers and ships." Questions bounded through Dahlia's mind. Where had the thief gone? What were his plans? Why did he want to chat with Ikaika? Of the few things she was sure of, top of the list was this: the man was dangerous. Then another question rose to the forefront of her mind. She turned to her brother. "Why would he want your badge? He would have taken the ID card from Mr. Cuddle, right? Why would he want two of them?" Ikaika shook his head, then looked up. "It wasn't that he wanted two of them. No, think about it. He wanted a pilot's badge. What is the one thing our badges allow us to do that an instructor's card wouldn't?" Dahlia got it. She understood. "Moons. He's going to steal a ship," Dahlia said. "What do we do? Should we tell the other instructors?" Ikaika grabbed her arm. "There won't be any time for that. By the time we explain everything, he'll be long gone. We have to stop him." Dahlia couldn't have hesitated if she wanted to, being dragged by her brother through the door. "What's the rush?" laughed another student as they ran. Ikaika pushed past him, snatching the ID badge from around the other student's neck. "Hey, what?" the boy cried out. Ikaika didn't stop to explain that he needed the badge to operate a ship so that they could catch an imposter who had infiltrated the base, tied up an instructor, impersonated said instructor, and then stolen important information. He'd have to fill him in later. They raced to the out bay, catching their breath. Dahlia scanned the bay. It was quiet. The bay had its busy times, and this was not one of them. "There!" Ikaika shouted, pointing toward one end of the bay. A ship's flashers lit, and they heard the sound of the propulsion packs firing up. "Grab a ship!" Ikaika yelled. "What? Are you serious?" Dahlia questioned. "This is what we do," Ikaika said, pulling her arm again. "We're pilots. We train for this stuff. The only difference is that this mission starts in our own outbay." Dahlia nodded, convincing herself. There was no one else around. This guy had important documents. He was a danger to the USSA. And even worse, the image sprang to mind of Mr. Cuttle tied up on the floor. This guy, this thief, needed to be stopped. "Okay, let's do it," she said, as they each sprinted toward a ship. The man would have a head start. He might get away. Dahlia and Ikaika were trained pilots, though. They had youthful reflexes on their side. They had to try. The stolen ship flew from the outbay toward the atmosphere above the base, leaving the blue and green of the planet and entering the blackness of space. Less than a minute later, 2 more ships exited the bay. "Hurry!" Ikaika said in his comm. He was really moving. "You can't push the ships that hard in the atmosphere. They aren't meant for that," Dahlia warned, worried. Ikaika didn't care. He pushed harder. It was working. They were catching up with the thief. "Nice of you to join me," said a voice. Dahlia glanced down at a screen on the dashboard of her ship. She saw the face, the one with the ugly beard. Chapter 4. Ikaika responded first. There was anger in his tone, feeling like a fool for having been tricked, having aided the man. "Who are you? We know you're not Cuttle," the boy accused. "Of course I am not Cuttle. Cuttle is a fool, just like the rest of your instructors." "So who are you?" he repeated. "You can call me Norton. Better learn the name now, I suppose. I will be your leader soon enough." "What are you talking about?" Dahlia demanded. "I am taking over the USSA. Haven't you heard? Well, I suppose not. It's only just beginning. But I do thank you for your assistance. It was most helpful." Ikaika had heard enough. He fired his blaster right at the ship in front of them. It was a direct shot, a perfect aim, and it did nothing. The blue laser shot and was absorbed instantly. Norton laughed. Eager, aren't we? But foolish, my young friend. I've put my ship in trainee mode. You remember how that works, don't you? Well, even if you've forgotten, your ships have not. Your weapon systems recognize me as a friendly ship, one in training. You can fire all you want. It will do nothing to stop me." Moons, he was right. Dahlia bit her lip, frustrated by the man and his know-it-all attitude. Without blasters, what were they to do? Ikaika continued with his bitter banter, Norton enjoying every second of it. The 3 ships zipped in and around asteroids and moons, a chase with no end in sight. It was obvious that Dahlia and Ikaika were the superior pilots, but there was little they could do without their weapons. Dahlia looked through her windshield and caught sight of something. An idea sprouted in her mind. They'd need to act quickly if it were going to work. She switched her comm to communicate only with her brother. "There, the black hole. Do you see it?" Ikaika paused, then answered. "Yeah? So what?" "We send him into the black hole," she answered. He thought on this. Black holes were still very much a mystery, but they were known to be hazardous. Few, if any, who entered were ever seen or heard from again. Ikaika liked the sound of that. "I love it. What do you have in mind?" he asked. "Remember that move you pulled with your grappling hook in the sim earlier?" Ikaika nodded. "Awesome, but it'll take both of us. It'll be much easier to aim if we can whip him in together." The 2 aligned their ships, side by side, a short distance behind Norton. 1, 2, 3! They each sent their hooks flying. Click, click. Connections were made. "Now!" Dahlia shouted. The two blasted forward, tugging Norton behind them, towing him toward the black hole. His ship struggled, but couldn't break free. "What is happening?" he cried out. "What are you doing?" Ikaika and Dahlia leveled their ships, aiming the trajectory. "Ready?" Ikaika said. "Aim?" Dahlia answered. "Fire!" The two stopped their ships in mid-maneuver, catapulting Norton forward at an uncontrollable speed. "No! No!" he bellowed as his ship shot straight into the blackness. Then all went quiet. The ship was gone. Norton had been sent into the black hole, into nothingness. His comm connection disappeared. "Yes!" Ikaika shouted. The two celebrated for a moment, and then turned their ships back toward base. They knew they'd have some explaining to do when they returned. "That was such a great idea back there. Seriously, good work, sis," Ikaika said. "Well, the idea came from watching you. You really are a good pilot, Ikaika." "I mean that," she replied. He chuckled. "You know why, right? You know how I got so good?" Dahlia rolled her eyes, expecting a boast for the ages. "I learned from watching you, from flying with you, competing with you. You're the reason." The comm went silent for a moment. Dahlia didn't know what to say to that. Maybe having a hotshot little brother wasn't all bad. She smiled. She almost told him about the prank waiting for him in his bunk. Almost. Thank you for listening to this production of Project Alpha, a short audio story, written and performed by Tyson Clayson. This is one of 3 short audio stories in a series, the others being Thunder and the Light Whips and The Dusters. All 3 stories connect to the book Slater and the Goliath, which is available on Amazon. Griff hopes you have enjoyed this story and thanks you for listening.